Hey there friends, welcome to The Last Climb. Today, I'm about to tell you the brutal story of a stubborn influencer who thought she knew better than the veteran Sherpas guiding her. She had everything she thought, the mountain rewards, the fitness, the fearlessness, the thousands of fans who believed in her. But high on Manaslu, she made one call: the death zone does not forgive, and the Sherpas guiding her are traumatized by it to this day. It was the 20th of September, 2022, in the thin and freezing air near the top of Manaslu, the 8th highest mountain on Earth, where a young woman from Brazil stood on the true summit her lead guide had urged her not to push for, given the hour and how slowly she was moving, filming the proof she had come for, when the hardest part, the part that would cost her everything, was still ahead of her on the way down. Her name was Bianca Rezende. She was 27, and she was from Brazil. And if you spend any real time online, you may already know the kind of person she was, even if you never once heard her name. She was an influencer, a word people love to sneer at. So let me be fair to her from the start. She was not a spoiled girl playing at adventure. She was fit, a former competitive runner who had spent years building her body and her brand from nothing. And she had earned an enormous, loyal following by being relentlessly, almost fiercely positive. She had grown up without much, far from any real mountain, and had clawed her way to a life of meaning by sheer force of will. That was the whole engine of her story. The poor kid who refused the limits everyone handed her. And it was true, which is exactly why it was so dangerous. Her whole message, the thing that thousands of people loved her for, was simple. No limits. Never quit. Prove the people who doubt you wrong. She posted her training in the dark before dawn, her failures and her comebacks. She answered thousands of messages from people who said she was the reason they had gotten out of bed, and she had truly helped a great many ordinary people believe they could change their lives. That message was real, and it had carried her out of an ordinary life into a remarkable one. The trouble is that a belief which works beautifully in a gym or on a marathon course does not work at 26,000 feet, where the mountain does not care how badly you want it, and where refusing to quit is not a virtue at all, but a cause of death. The reason Manaslu mattered so much to her comes down to something that had happened only months earlier, and it is a very modern kind of wound. On an earlier climb, a smaller peak she had summited and celebrated to her thousands of followers, a rival climber and then a wave of online critics had accused her of faking it, of stopping short of the real top and claiming it anyway, of being hauled up by her guides and calling the achievement her own. The accusation was specific and vicious, dressed up as concern for the truth, the way these things always do. Whether or not any of it was fair, it spread everywhere within days, picked apart by people who had never climbed anything, and it cut her to the bone because it attacked the single thing her entire life and brand were built on, the belief that she was the real thing and not a performance. Manaslu was going to be her answer. Not the easy version, not the summit so many people quietly cut short, but the true summit, filmed and dated and utterly undeniable, so no one could ever call her a fraud again. She spoke of it that way to the people close to her, not as a climb but as a reckoning. Looking back, that was the first warning sign, because a mountain is a terrible place to go looking for revenge. I want to say this plainly up front. She was not stupid and she was not lazy. She trained like a professional and she had earned a huge following telling ordinary people that they could do anything. You have to understand Manaslu, because it is not a forgiving place. It is the 8th highest mountain in the world, standing 26,781 feet above the sea, deep in the Nepali Himalaya, and its name is usually translated as the Mountain of the Spirit, which sounds beautiful until you understand what it does to the people who come for it. For years, it has carried a strange and dangerous reputation, because it is marketed as one of the easier of the great 8,000ers, a good first one, a gentle place to earn your first taste of that height before something truly serious. And so it draws people who are not truly ready for it, people building a climbing resume, chasing a first big peak for the story and the sponsorship, onto a mountain that is in fact deadly, prone to sudden avalanches that have wiped out whole groups, and hammered by weather that can turn lethal in under an hour. Its summit sits high in the zone climbers call the death zone. Up there, the air holds so little oxygen that prolonged time causes the body to deteriorate steadily, unable to recover or properly sustain itself. And no amount of fitness changes that arithmetic, because you cannot train your way out of the need to breathe. Above that line, everything is borrowed time. The body cannot recover or heal or properly think, and consumes itself just to stay warm and breathing, which is why climbers describe the death zone as a place where you are slowly dying no matter what you do, and the only question is whether you get down in time. The most important rule of the whole game is the turnaround time, the fixed hour by which you must give up the summit and start down whether you have reached the top or not, because this mountain, like all of them, has killed far more people on the way down than on the way up. Most of us will never stand where she stood, and I think that makes her far too easy to judge from a warm couch. But almost everyone watching has once refused to quit something that they should have walked away from. Here's the piece that makes Manaslu so fitting and so cruel, for a story about proving yourself. For decades, this mountain has had two summits. There is the foresummit, a broad, rounded dome of snow that is relatively safe to reach, and beyond it, across a narrow, heavily corniced, terrifyingly exposed ridge, the true summit, a fragile pinnacle of snow and rime that is far more dangerous to stand on, a place where the ground itself can break away beneath you because a cornice is a frozen wave of overhanging snow with empty air underneath. For years, a great many climbers simply stopped at the foresummit, took their photographs, and went home calling it the top, and almost no one questioned it. Then the record keepers, the meticulous people who scrutinize these claims for a living, began pointing out that enormous numbers of so-called summits had never actually reached the real one, that the mountain's history of ascents was quietly riddled with tops that were not the top. It became a genuine scandal in the climbing world, a hard line between those who had truly done the true summit and those who had settled for the easier version and called it done. For Bianca, freshly and publicly accused of exactly that kind of shortcut, that line was everything. Reaching the foresummit and stopping would not answer her critics. It would prove them right. She had not come all the way to Manaslu to touch the fake top. She had come for the real one and to film herself standing on it. I need you to see this point clearly. By this point, she was not chasing a mountain. She was chasing an argument with strangers online, all the way into the deadliest air on Earth. According to Furba and the rest of the team, she was strong on the lower mountain, and that is part of what doomed her. Her Sherpa team, led by Furba Nuru, a guide who had summited Manaslu several times before, watched her move well through the lower camps, fit and cheerful, filming little clips at every rest, and it confirmed for everyone, including her, that she truly belonged up there. She acclimatized well, she carried her own weight when many clients do not, and she won over the team with her warmth, so that by the summit push, there was real affection between this Brazilian influencer and the Nepali guides, whose job it was to keep her alive. But being fit at the bottom of a mountain and being fast near the top of one are two entirely different things. And in the thin air near the summit, her pace, like almost everyone's, fell apart. The body that could run for hours at sea level could manage only a few slow steps before it had to stop, chest heaving, for a rest that gave nothing back. On summit day, they left the high camp in the black cold well after midnight, a long string of headlamps swaying up the slope, and from the start she was slower than the plan needed her to be. The weather itself was not the enemy that day. The wind stayed climbable and the sky mostly clear, but the cold on the upper mountains sat far below zero, the kind that can turn bare skin white in a minute or two. The fixed ropes were crowded with other teams all going for the same weather window, and the hours bled away far faster than the distance did. There were long, freezing waits at the difficult sections, clipped in behind a dozen other climbers, unable to move or warm up, each delay eating into the razor-thin margin that summit day allows. It was eating into her oxygen too, so that she used it far faster than planned, switching onto her reserve cylinder earlier than anyone had wanted, and reached the foresummit with far less left than the plan had ever allowed for. By the time she and Furba, climbing among several nearby teams on the same fixed line, reached the foresummit, that broad, safe dome where so many people stop, the sun was already high and the day was already old. Many of the climbers up there that morning did what the mountain wants you to do. They stood on the foresummit, took their photographs, and turned around while they still had the strength and daylight to get down. Others, further along the ridge, were pushing on for the true summit, part of a crowd strung out all over the upper mountain. Because this was one of the busy true summit seasons, and the real top was the prize everyone now wanted. We know a great deal about her final climb, and it does not come from anything recovered from her body, which was never brought down. It comes from Furba, who filmed much of the worst of it on his own phone and carried it off the mountain from a few climbers who caught pieces of her while filming their own summit, and from the clips she had sent out herself before the push. In the videos from base camp sent to her followers over the expedition's satellite link in the days before she went up, she is luminous, funny, exhausted, but glowing, promising the people watching she was going to carry every one of them to the top. Those were the last posts the world got in real time, because there is essentially no signal higher up, so anything filmed above base camp came down with a living person, or not at all. In the footage that did survive from summit day, most of it shot by Furba and glimpsed in the background of other climbers' summit videos, the change in her is visible and hard to watch. Her voice is slower, her breathing ragged behind the oxygen mask, the easy joy replaced by a grim, narrowed focus. In one short clip Furba filmed on the 4 summit, with the true summit visible behind her across that thin and deadly ridge, she looks straight into the lens and says she did not come all this way to stop at the fake one. It is a video she filmed for thousands of people, not one of whom would see it until after she was gone. A viewer named Zero Griffin said under my last video that these poor Sherpas can't catch a break. And honestly, comments like his from all of you are why I keep telling these stories. So hold that thought, because everything Furba does next proves him right. What happened at the 4 summit is the very heart of this story, and it comes almost entirely from Furba and the other Sherpas who were standing right there beside her. They looked at the time and at her, moving slowly, breathing hard, already deep into the last of her reserves, and at the true summit still waiting across that exposed ridge, and they told her, as clearly as they knew how, that she needed to stop here. Turning a client around is never an easy call, and it can mean unhappy clients and hard conversations with the operator afterward, even when it is plainly the safest one. But reputable outfits back their guides on safety, and when men like these tell a client to quit within sight of the top, it is because they see something the client cannot. It was not that the true summit was off limits. By that season, nearly every team was going for the real top, and the ropes ran all the way to it. The problem was her. That day, this late, moving this slowly, with this little oxygen left. She probably could still reach it, but reaching it would take everything she had, and they could see, with dozens of expeditions on these peaks between them, that if she spent it all going up, she would not have enough to get herself back down. That is the sentence that matters here. The men who climb this mountain for a living looked at her and did not believe she would get back down if she kept climbing, and Furba told her exactly that, on the one spot on Earth where that judgment was worth more than any follower count or brand deal. By their account, she barely argued. She said, quietly, through the mask, that she had not come for the fake summit and started out across the ridge toward the real one. Furba, who could not physically force a grown client to turn around, and who would not leave her to do it alone, went with her, while the other Sherpas, each responsible for clients of their own they could not abandon, turned back down. The call was relayed to base camp over the radio, and from the ridge onward, Furba was the last guide who stayed with her, so almost everything we know of what came next comes from him. Watch how fast it turns here, because this is the moment where it stopped being about a mountain for me. She had the truth in her ears from the only people who knew, and she walked past it toward a photograph. She reached the true summit in the early afternoon, hours later than anyone ever should, and well past the expedition's intended turnaround time, and she got the exact thing she had come for. Furba filmed her there, on the real top, the answer to every person who had ever called her a liar. And for a few minutes, by his account, she was radiant, weeping behind her goggles, thanking him over and over, thanking the people watching who could not see her yet, saying she had done it. It is a terrible thing to know those were probably the happiest minutes of the last day of her life, bought with the exact reserves she needed to survive the trip home. Because then they turned to start down, and the mountain began, very quietly, to take all of it back. She was already running on empty. The ridge that had been merely terrifying on the way out was now a slow, swaying nightmare. Her balance and coordination going first, her steps turning clumsy and uncertain, her body slowly stopping, answering the way a body is supposed to. Furba short roped her, tying her directly to himself and trying to move her down by his own strength and will, taking her weight, coaxing one more step and then one more. He got her back across the ridge, past the 4 summit, and onto the descent proper, and for a little while it must have looked as though effort alone might save her. But she was slowing with every step, sitting down in the snow when she should have been walking, walking, asking to rest when rest was the one thing that would kill her, and the afternoon was sliding toward the long, killing cold of another night at the top of the world. Every climber I have ever spoken to repeats the same brutal line about the top. Getting up is optional, but getting down is mandatory. And by the summit, she had already spent the fare for both. What was happening inside her body is grimly predictable and worth understanding, because it explains why the descent, not the summit, is where these stories actually end. At that altitude, starved of oxygen for far too long and pushed for far too many hours, the body and the brain begin to fail together. Exhaustion becomes something much deeper, a quiet shutting down that no amount of willpower can override, because the fuel it would run on is simply not there. By then, she had been climbing for most of a day, eating and drinking almost nothing, severely dehydrated on top of everything else, and every one of these things made the next one worse. The balance and coordination go first, so that walking a straight line on flat, safe ground becomes difficult, let alone down climbing a corniced ridge above a drop of more than a mile, and the walk turns into a slow, drunken stagger. Then, the thinking clouds, confusion setting in along with a strange, seductive drowsiness that makes sitting down in the snow feel like the most reasonable idea in the world, and the judgment fails, so that the very decisions that might save a life stop being possible to make. The speech slurs. In time, the body simply stops obeying at all. What she was most likely showing, in plain medical terms, were the signs of high-altitude cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain the height itself can bring on, which steals balance and eventually consciousness, and can take a person talking and smiling an hour before and leave them unable to stand. And the cold, once the sun drops, finishes whatever the height has started, because a body that can no longer move can no longer make heat. None of it is dramatic in the way the films pretend. It is a slow, quiet, downward slide, a person gradually running out of the ability to keep themselves alive, and the most heartbreaking part is that by the time it is truly happening, the person it is happening to often no longer understands anything is wrong. Somewhere on that descent, I think the mountain stopped bargaining. Her body was failing faster than anyone could carry her, and the men beside her were running out of the one thing you cannot buy up there, which is time. The last clear moment anyone can account for comes from Furba, and it is almost unbearable to pass along. Somewhere below the foresummit, as the light failed and the temperature fell off a cliff the way it does when the sun leaves the high Himalaya, she stopped being able to move on her own at all. He gave her his own oxygen, switching her regulator onto one of his own cylinders and turning the flow up as high as it would go, which is a thing only a certain kind of person does at that height. He wrapped what spare clothing he had around her and tried to keep her moving, because keeping her moving was the only realistic way to make any body heat at all, and radioed down again and again for help everyone already knew could not come, because no helicopter could realistically perform a rescue from where she lay, so near the summit, and no other exhausted climber could carry her down that ground and live. By his account, she was calm near the end, mostly gone from herself, drifting somewhere the altitude had taken her, saying a few soft words he has chosen never to repeat, out of a decency that tells you everything about the man they had all underestimated. He stayed with her, as long as staying meant anything, far longer than was safe, until the terrible arithmetic of the death zone left him one choice: to go down alone or to lie down beside her and die there for nothing. Bianca Resende died high on Manaslu on the descent from the true summit of what was most likely high-altitude cerebral edema, compounded by exhaustion and hypothermia, most likely late on that same day or in the first dark hours of the night. She died, in the end, in almost the exact place and for almost the exact reason that the men who climb that mountain for a living had warned her that she would, on the way down from a summit they had firmly told her not to attempt. There is a particular horror in that, in the fact that it was not a freak accident, not a hidden crevasse or a rogue avalanche, but the precise and foreseeable outcome experienced people had described to her only hours before, and that she had walked past. Furba lived. He got himself down through the dark and cold to the high camp, frostbitten and hollowed out, carrying something he will carry now for the rest of his life. Everything we know of her final hours, we know only because he survived them, and was willing, much later, to speak about the worst day of his life. She was not, in the coldest possible accounting, killed by the mountain alone. She was killed by a story she had told about herself for years, a story that said the only real failure was quitting, on the one day of her life when quitting was the one thing that could have saved it. Her body was never brought down. Recovery from that height was judged far too dangerous to attempt, the same conditions that had killed her, turning any recovery of the dead into a likely death sentence for the living. So she remains where she stopped, high on the mountain of the spirit. But the footage came down anyway, carried off the mountain on Furba's phone, and caught in the background of other climbers' summit videos. The moment on the true summit, the proof she had died for, reached the thousands she had promised to bring up there with her. And here's the part almost too sad to say out loud. The proof worked. The video of her standing on the true summit, the rival who had called her a fraud went silent. Many who had torn her apart publicly apologized, and the comment sections filled instead with grief and tribute. Much of the world seemed to agree, at last, that she was exactly what she had always said she was, that she had done the real thing and not the easy lie. She had, in the end, won the argument. She simply was not alive to know it, and not one person who loved her ever believed, even for a moment, that it had been worth the price. Nobody filmed the part that actually mattered, and maybe that is the cruelest thing I can hand you. The footage that survived her is all triumph, and not one frame of it shows what that triumph truly cost. I have thought a long time about who to be angry at in this story, and the honest answer is that there is no villain in it, which is somehow worse. Bianca was not a fool. She was brave and disciplined and kind, and the message she built her whole life upon, that you must never quit on yourself, is a real and good message that has truly helped real people climb out of dark places. Her Sherpas were not careless, and they were not just paid help who failed to control a client. They warned her, told her the flat truth, and then very nearly died trying to save her from her own decision. The thing that actually killed her was smaller and quieter than any villain. It was a single idea, a good idea, in almost every setting, carried one step too far into the one place on earth where that idea simply does not hold. Everywhere else in her life, refusing to quit had been her great strength, the engine of everything good that had happened to her. Up there, above the death zone, it was the flaw that killed her. And the unsettling thing is how many of us carry that same idea around every day, proud of it, printing it on posters, having never once been anywhere that would test it all the way to death. Remember that the people who warned her were not doubting her heart or her strength. They were doing the cold arithmetic she could not. And I think that quiet, ignored warning is the saddest part of all. I do not tell this story to shame a dead woman who cannot answer back, because there is nothing to celebrate in a bright, driven, kind-hearted young person dying alone and confused near the top of the world, far from everyone who loved her. I tell it because her death holds a lesson that has almost nothing to do with mountains and everything to do with the rest of us. The people who do a hard, dangerous thing for a living are not trying to steal your moment when they tell you to stop. They are not doubting you. They are seeing something you cannot see, precisely because you want the thing too badly to see it clearly. Turning around is not the failure. It is very often the bravest and smartest thing a person can do, and it was the one move that her entire life and her entire brand had trained her never to make. She climbed anyway, toward a summit she reached, a proof she won, and a life she lost. And somewhere up there, the mountain of the spirit did with her exactly what it quietly does with everyone who mistakes, wanting a thing badly enough for being able to survive it. The doubters were wrong about her. She was the real thing. I only wish that being the real thing had been enough to bring her home.